Hi, my name is Audra Edwards, and I'm here today to talk to you about the intersection of nature and history. We're going to take a look at the question, can the landscape be a primary source? In the field of public history, it has become important to consider the landscape of the event. And one way that we do this is we preserve battlefields, and it is important to preserve the landscape to reflect the events that happened at the time. So today we're going to be looking at how the flood of 1916 impacted McDowell County, North Carolina, and the pieces of the landscape that can tell that story. So before the flood, McDowell County had undergone a lot of changes. The railroad had just been completed in the northern part of the county, and that was a huge feat technologically. It's about a 1,000-foot drop from Altipass, North Carolina, where the railroad has a station where there are lots of mines. And those rails have to drop very gradually because of the braking capacity of the trains. And so the clinch-filled loops was a technological innovation that was installed in the northern part of McDowell County to deal with that quick descent from the mountains. Okay, so we are here in Altipass, and here you can kind of see the Altipass orchard in the distance. And this is the descent that the train had to follow into North Cove and then eventually down to Marion. As you can tell, it's a pretty dramatic descent. And you can actually kind of see the modern railroad a little bit in the distance, that small line above the rhododendron. Electricity had been created and brought into Marion proper in the downtown area, and this flood is going to wipe out a decent amount of that. So let's take a look at exactly what happened with this flood. On the night of July 15th, 1916, people went to their beds with it raining outside. It's a deciduous rainforest here, so that's not that strange. However, the events of the next 24 hours are historical. To this day, we have not surpassed the record set that night. 24 inches of rain fell in Altipass, North Carolina. That is a record, and that rain went down the mountain at the quickest rate possible, on the fastest path possible, and it took a lot of soil with it. Our landscape was formed by the flood of 1916, or at least reformed. The Appalachian Mountains are the oldest ones in North America, and so they have undergone many changes, but the flood of 1916 left its mark. As you can see in the picture on the left, the timber and debris from the mountain come flooding down en masse. On the picture on the right, a rock that is estimated to be about 90 tons was relocated about a half a mile down Humpback Mountain. Families' lives were completely upended by this flood. Here you can see a picture of an unknown abode that has been severely affected. It is literally hanging off the side of a ravine. Many other homes were also completely destroyed by the flood. So you can see here Jimmy Brown's family home near Linville Falls. This is the picture of it taken on July 25th of 1916, and the foundation is completely destroyed. And on the right, this is an update taken about a month later, where the postman has finally made it into the North Cove Valley to deliver mail, and you can see the home is still hanging off the side of the ravine. You can also see to his left, our right, there are layers to the rock here that kind of shows us this is not the only flood that has ever happened in this area, but it is the one that happened in the modern era to change the landscape here. This is another picture of a family's home that was lost to the flood. It was the Conley home. You can see what it looked like before with the family happy in front of it, and then the effects of the flood on it. It's not only people's lives that were upended, but also the economy of the area. Those new clinch-filled loops that allowed us to have this, economy, like this train going through the area, were also severely affected by the flood. Here you can see the tracks literally suspended over a gap in the soil. It has completely washed away what was once its foundation. And so the railroad itself required a lot of repairs before they could be made usable again. It was not just the ravines, but also the tunnels that were affected. Here you can see the portal of Lick Log Tunnel, which is about 200 foot down into a ravine. It has been pretty well buried by debris, and this is their attempts at cleaning that out. The farmers were also severely affected economically, not just the railroad. Here you can see the pictures of the fields littered with stones that came down off the mountains during the flood. To the bottom left, there is the North Cove Valley right below the Ashford Fire Department. Both of these pictures are from that area, just different orientations. And on the right, you can actually see the North Fork of the Catawba River and the new stones that changed the ways that the river ran. It wasn't a dramatic shift in the river itself, but it is still a very rocky river. And so these changes were fairly permanent in the river, and it took quite a while, according to the farmers, to pick up after the flood and make their fields usable again. The changes to the landscape were pretty dramatic. Here you can see Short Off Mountain and how the landscape changed as well after the 1916 flood. To this day, it still looks like that right picture with the exposed rock faces. There were many lessons that the 1916 flood taught us. For instance, the fills of the railroads had to be reinforced in another way. Here you can see these fills where they have taken dirt and filled up the culverts in between mountains. They just completely disappeared after the 1916 flood. On the left, you can see a group of men, of railroad workers, balancing on the tracks that are completely suspended over a gap between two mountains. On the right, you can see the track has completely shifted down the mountain from where it was actually located. So they had to learn to deal with floods in the mountains. And so in this next little field trip, we're going to take a look at how they dealt with that. Okay, so we are about to start that same descent to go and see one of the places where the ground washed completely out of the from underneath the railroad. I'm really hoping all of the snow is gone, because otherwise this may be interesting. Don't worry, I'll speed this up. So one of the many lessons that was learned because of the 1916 flood was that areas like this, where the railroad is actually going across a ravine, they're going to be problematic. And so after the flood of 1916, you can actually see behind me right here this tower. And that tower is actually a drain. And the reason that it's actually going up about 2 stories is so that debris can come down the mountain and hit the thing, pile up, it'll go up to the next window and drain down, and it actually goes underneath the railroad itself, and it ends up flooding, like pretty much treating it like a bathtub. And so these were installed after the flood of 1916. Much of the damage from the 1916 flood has consciously been undone by farmers seeking to reclaim their land for use. However, if you venture up a mountain towards the eastern side of 221 North, you can still see boulder fields like this, where rocks have slid down the mountain from the 1916 flood and most likely other floods after that as well. It took a long time to clean up from this flood, but some of these mountains still preserve the memory. The rock fields can kind of be a little hard to see in the background, but Here you can actually see how much the sheer quantity and size of some of the rocks that have come down the mountain. So you can kind of see that these are fairly untouched since the 1916 flood, and they're fairly close to the road. The job of preserving the memories of the 1916 flood have fallen to a range of individuals. Some remember it in the stories that they tell their children and grandchildren. Others took pictures and preserved what the landscape looked like. It was not actually feasible for them to preserve the entire landscape and the effects of the 1916 flood. People needed that land to run their farms and to raise their cows on and to transport the goods via rail. And so most of the memory of the 1916 flood is preserved in the pictures that were taken. Other ways are the locals using the rocks in different ways, whether it's decorations next to their driveway or, in this instance, next to their store. Here you can see the English Farmstead cheese store, and they have one of the boulders that fell down the mountain as part of kind of the attraction next to the road to draw attention to their sign. But many of the rocks around here, actually, these large rocks came down from the mountains in the 1916 flood. And in the memories of the locals, these rocks kind of symbolize what happened and the stories that the older generations have passed down to them.